I started back in this business in 1955 at radio station CKEY, and I was in the recording department. And the way I got into the business actually was I was actually working for an old Torontonian by the name of Jack Kent Cooke, who moved to the States and became famous and multi-billions of dollars. But anyway, he was, when I was working at his printing company or his magazine company, I was the mail boy. And I met him every morning at 7 o'clock because I was delivering his mail. And one day he said to me, would I go get him a cup of coffee? And I said, oh, sure. So I went. And then every day after that, my job was to bring Mr. Cook's coffee, chat with him for a few minutes, and then get on with my deliveries. He asked me if I knew anything about radio, and I said, no, but I have one. And so he sent me over to see the people at the radio station, and they gave me a job in the recording department as a recording assistant. I worked there for, 7, 8 years, doing recordings, mostly live to air type recordings, and then and some jingles. Then RCA Victor had the studio in Toronto in 1962. I was going to be married in 63. I wasn't making enough money. I decided I better do something with my life other than whatever it was I was doing. So I went over and applied for this job at RCA and got it, and that's where I started my real recording career, was at RCA Victor. I went from RCA Victor to Eastern Sound, from Eastern Sound to Toronto Sound with Terry Brown, and from there I opened my own studio in Thornhill called United Media. Well, what started to happen in Toronto, especially, they in television, nobody was doing a very good job at television sound. So they started to, the television people, producers, started to drag us guys out of the studio into the television studios. And so my career took a great big 160 because I became all of a sudden the de facto kind of television sound consultant. I consulted to CBC and CTV and NBC and all kinds of places for years. And for 35 years at CTV, I was their musical audio consultant because nobody was doing it. And they weren't doing all that great a job. I worked with Kenny Rogers for 5 years on his show. Actually did an album with Kenny. Did, Bachman, Randy Bachman. I did all these Burton Cummings specials, all these specials, based on the fact that for some reason somebody decided I actually knew something. The Hockey Night in Canada theme, obviously, was CBC. Actually, it wasn't even CBC. Molson's recorded it through McLaren Advertising as a commercial for the opening of the hockey. Every Saturday night in Canada, as we know, everybody lines up in front of their television sets and watches hockey. And so this theme was designed strictly to be run 13, 14 weeks, one season, and it was going to be the opening theme. And next year, maybe they'd do another one. It was a Molson Canadian jingle. But it caught on, and for 40 years, it's been the theme. It was been re-recorded about 3 different times by various and sundry people. When CTV bought it, Ivan Fitsan, who's the CEO of Globe Media, I guess, he wanted it back. But what he wanted was he also wanted it to be as true to the original as he could possibly get it. So the guys at CTV, Paul Sellers, Michael Noonan, and the other guy's name's gone out of my head, but Josh, they decided that it would be a good idea to have somebody old enough that might remember what that was like to sit in the booth with them. So I sat in the truck with them, made some conversation, but I tried to stay out of it because they seemed to have it all together, pretty smart guys. But then they asked me to come and work on the mix with them. So I did that, and we finished the mix in a day. It took us 3 or 4 hours to get the mix done, and Mr. Fitsan was totally excited by it. In fact, the first thing he said, he played it, and then he said, okay, now turn it up the way you would really actually like to hear it. So we cranked it. He was thrilled to death, and that's the new theme that's on TSN. Whenever TSN has hockey, that's where the new hockey theme is. Jerry Toth, who's since passed away, was the arranger, and I always give him credit for the song. The song was about a 16-bar song, and that was it. But what Jerry did was the arrangement, and that's what makes that song work, in my opinion, anyway. And anybody that knows the song knows what I'm talking about, with the trombones and the French horns doing the first and then the trumpets and the saxes and the horns, and it's an awesome song. The one thing I always felt in I never treated it as a job. I always treated it as just being. It was more fun to me to be there. I always tell people I never had a bad day at the office ever. I've been doing this 53 years this year. In fact, last week when I did, it was great because they dragged me from my retirement home up north to the city to do that, and it was like I'd never left it. I knew what I wanted to do. In fact, Michael Noonan sent me. He's the chief guy. I don't know if you might know Michael from CTV. And he sent me a thing and said, there's nothing like a steady hand and a great set of ears to make things work. And so I was pretty pleased that I could still listen, I could still hear. And I just felt that the highlight of my career is everything I ever did. Yeah, sure, the Hockey Night. I always tell people Hockey Night Canada was my greatest hit. It's probably the longest playing piece of music ever in the history of television. But if it was a record, it would have sold about 80 billion records at this point. But everything I did, I never had some bad sessions, but I never let them dwell. Yeah, it was a bad session. Screw it. Moving on. And the same guy Jerry Toth used to, when I would be doing an album, and he'd be going, and I'd be mixing, and he'd reach over and stop the tape and say, "It's done. It's done. Move on." But I've done, things with NBC. I've done things with CBS. I've done things with CBC, CTV. I've done work in Japan and in China and all over the place. And I just enjoyed my life. I just enjoyed my career. And it also gave me a life that I could enjoy because it paid not bad money. Not bad money to do it. So, I mean, if you're going to do what you really like and get paid for it, what gets better than that?